Welcome back. The Russian military is testing a weapon called the Poseidon missile that could threaten the west coast of the United States. Former Assistant Secretary of State Christopher Ford says the weapon could generate radioactive tsunamis. Chris Ford is now Senior Advisor for Geopolitical Policy and Strategy at MITRE. Chris, welcome. It's great to see you. Thanks for coming on the program. That really sounds terrible. Radioactive tsunamis. How serious is this threat from Russia?
Well, I mean, I speak only for me personally, but it's certainly something that would disturb me if I lived in an American coastal city that the Russians are, rather explicitly threatening with this new device. It's worth saying, I mean, from a military perspective, purely from a sort of war fighting and military capabilities perspective, it's not clear what this would actually add to Russia's capabilities. I mean, it's an extraordinarily crude weapon. There's no sign of any particular sophistication or even a pretense that it would be targeted at legitimate military objects in ways that are consistent with the law of war. It does seem to be, I mean, it's noisy and slow to go across the ocean, relatively speaking, compared to a ballistic missile. I don't know what it adds in terms of military capability, but it is clearly pure and simple. It's a terror weapon. It's designed to kill or traumatize the inhabitants of American coastal cities in a really sort of barbaric way, and to leave radiation in effect in its aftermath in ways that could render those cities uninhabitable for a very long time. So that tells you depressingly much about where the Kremlin's head is here. This is there's no way this could be anything but a giant war crimes problem waiting to happen.
One of the issues that I talk about with especially uniformed military personnel in this program all the time is the concept of weapons as a way of deterring war. What do we know from either a diplomatic or some other type of interaction with the Russians' perspective about whether they plan weapons like this to try to deter us from threatening them, or whether this is something they want to use proactively? Is there any way to tell that?
I mean, it would be a lot easier to have answers to those questions if the Russians were more willing to talk to us honestly and openly about their nuclear doctrine and strategy and how they think about these things. I would guess that there certainly is at least some deterrent objective here. It's probably not a very good first strike weapon because, I mean, frankly, driving something at high speed through the ocean like that is probably going to be extraordinarily noisy, and it's going to get there a lot more slowly than a ballistic missile that would fly through, an easier medium like space or the upper atmosphere. So it's not really a first strike weapon. But it does seem to be simply designed to induce terror by expressly targeting civilians in ways that it's not at all clear that the law of war could ever allow Russia legally to do. That itself is a sort of a disturbing insight to how they think about war planning. But I would imagine there is a strong deterrent element in their thinking. But they have been maddeningly unclear about it. And it would be great if they would be willing to be more honest with U.S. diplomats and open about these things. We could at least have the discussion. As it is, you see videos released on RT and lots of chest pounding sort of propaganda, but relatively little actual thoughtful engagement and honesty about this in the way that responsible states really should talk to each other.
This weapon could be, one version of it could be positioned at the base that I referenced at the beginning of this conversation in the Arctic. What's your sense of how this weapon fits into Russia's Arctic strategy? Do we have visibility into their Arctic strategy at all?
I honestly don't know myself whether there's much of a connection between the Arctic strategy per se and this particular system. Russia has a very aggressive Arctic strategy, to be sure, and the Poseidon system is a deliberately disturbing sort of thing. My guess would be, I mean, I don't know enough about exactly what the environment is under the ice, for example, in the Arctic, but I would think that, transiting the deep Pacific might be a better operational pattern for them. So I would be more concerned about this crossing the Pacific or conceivably the Atlantic, I guess, as a way to threaten coastal cities, rather than, for example, the North Shore of Alaska, which is that's a different target set entirely if you're simply talking about something designed to terrorize and kill civilians.
What do we know about the development of this, the evolution of it, how close it may be to operational capability, Chris?
Well, I probably shouldn't say much about what we think we understand about those details, insofar as a lot of that may well be classified. They have bragged about it. There was a very strange purported leak a number of years ago of some footage that purported to show some sort of designs or concept plans for this thing under a different name at the time. But then Putin went rather public in March of 2018 with his sort of infamous bragging about a whole range of new exotic strategic delivery systems that he seemed to feel very proud of, which is a strange thing to boast about in the modern era when everyone's talking about trying to figure out how we can live together better with the dangers of nuclear weaponry. But that's sort of how he operates. So they've made it an object of much bragging and boasting and to some degree bullying, but its specific operational capabilities they have not spoken much about, publicly at least.
We have about 30 seconds left, Chris. To the point of the internal conversations that Putin is having, how much of that could be attributed potentially to his desire to continue to portray himself as the strong leader of that country?
Oh, I think this is exactly the sort of thing. This is the nuclear equivalent of the braggadocio of taking your shirt off and riding around like a fool on a horse. It's not useful for anything in concrete terms that I think a serious warfighter or a military lawyer concerned with compliance with the law of war would be interested in. But it's great to boast and brag and show that or try to show that you're a big, important, and scary person on the world stage, and that seems to be really the objective of their foreign policy as much as anything.
Chris Ford, thank you very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me. Take care.